side, so. It's a training. It's a training, not a.
I wouldn't call
Not
that
fun.
the garden place.
No,
to
no,
go,
no, it's
but-
not. But if you're gonna be inside all day, you know.
Yeah, you.
At least you're not missing out on anything.
Yeah.
I printed those things for you.
Oh, okay,
and
great.
updated the presentation. And then Susie can't make it, so Marcia is gonna be her alternate.
Okay, she gonna be here?
Yeah, she
Okay.
emailed me.
Is Sylvia gonna be here, or is she gonna, I know
She didn't say she wasn't gonna be. So. We have a quorum.
Yeah, like.
You don't have a presentation for this, do you?
Put the mics on.
Well, I know that that was. And we've been trying our best to try to upgrade the system.
I have you sitting right beside to the left of Tom, or Cecilia.
Oh, where's this?
Yeah. Since you're gonna be vice chair. There's only one presentation.
That's right, yeah.
So short.
I think you have to
You can-
turn these to get
Oh,
them
these
up.
turn.
Am I?
Is it this way? We'll go up a little bit. Try it. That's better. Oh, I'm not gonna hold it. It's okay. Sorry.
I'll call the Port Hueneme Water Agency meeting to order. Shall we have a roll call, please? I think we do have a quorum, although we may be missing a member or two, but please call roll.
Member Schnapp, Member Spiegel, alternate Member Sharkey, or I'm sorry, Member Sharkey, alternate Member Marcus,
Here?
ex officio Member Nordahl,
Here.
Vice Chair Quaister, Chair Fig.
Here. Oh, we got a latecomer, so now we have an official quorum. I think all members are now present. Okay, so that brings us to the agenda. Do I hear a motion for approval or any revisions that you'd like?
Second.
I hear a motion for approval in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, that brings us to consent items, which is really just a matter of approving the minutes. Do I hear a motion?
Second.
Motion for approval in a second. All in favor? Aye. So approved. So that brings us to business items. But before we get there, I see we have a couple of new faces in the crowd. And I'm going to give our Navy non-voting member an opportunity to introduce you if you would care to address us at this point. Normally we wait until the open forum, but that's at the end of the agenda. So I would leave it to you.
Well, we just, at this point, as they see fit, they'll get forward. But we have visitors from San Diego, NAVFAC, Southwest, and sometimes at base level, we don't fully realize the reach back capability we have. But this is contract support and technical support coming out of San Diego, so we absolutely appreciate it.
Well, welcome. And if you would like to address us now or later on anything on the agenda, just let us know. Great. The other thing that, before we get into the agenda, this is not the first occasion I've heard from a member of the public saying that we got to be mindful of keeping our mics on because apparently it's not necessarily being received, at least for those that are live streaming these meetings. So just to be conscious of that. All right, so the first business item is that of the Cal Water Fix Report. Am I to understand, Mr. Hickox, this is yours?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. If you recall, a couple months back, a representative from Cayugas Municipal Water District was providing information related to some of the challenges in water supply up and down the state. And this individual, Eric Berg, remembered hearing from this board that they would be interested in knowing what more they could do as a policymaker level to get more involved in the movement of water throughout the state. This California water fix issue that's on the agenda this evening is an item that's going to be discussed in detail down at Metropolitan Water District headquarters on September 26th. And if I remember correctly, Mr. Rob Nordahl and John Sharkey have mentioned that they would like to attend. the Cayugas Municipal Water District, just for your information, is requesting that these individuals, if they go, that they present a 1 minute to a minute and a half speech regarding the subject, and there will be a list of topics for which the speakers could pick from. If they have a certain desire to speak on a particular item, they can certainly do so. And there is a vehicle that's going to be traveling down to Metropolitan Water District to take all the guest speakers. And because this meeting could be somewhat lengthy, they're allowing the Uber drivers account to bring the speakers back upon their completion of their speech if they wish, or they could ride back in the bus. This information is just being provided to you today to let you know that there is some activity that is occurring, and a couple of the board members had expressed their interest in participating.
Any questions, comments? Well, I look forward to our two board members reporting back to what occurred at the session and any information we may not otherwise be able to receive from staff. So, and that is, what was the meeting date, the 23rd?
26th.
26th. Okay. Well, our next regular meeting is October?
October
So it's a
20th.
month out. Okay. All right, well, unless there's anything of urgency that this body needs to, take up, but we'll expect then to get a report back in the end of October. I'm sorry, did you have something you wanted to?
Nothing of such import that you just mentioned. However, there is an article in the LA Times today that's kind of interesting about water fix. And for those who might be interested, it's there. I think it's in the first section, but it could be the California section. And we have discussed it, this meeting coming up at our board meeting. Excuse me.
Okay, so I understand this is really just an informational item, no action that's necessary.
Correct.
Okay, so this brings us then to an update on the services of water consultancy. I know this has been bouncing around for a while, and I appreciate the fact that you've provided some written backup documentation to the work that's been performed, but I'll leave it to you if you want to highlight any of that information.
Thank you. This has been discussed a couple of times here at the board, and Mr. Takaichi's efforts to date, they're not really measured in a value. They're measured in what information and historical background that they can provide to the new negotiations or the agreements within, or the negotiations regarding the agreements. Mr. Takaichi brought with him knowledge from when PHWA was first come together. So he knew the history of PHWA. He knew why the people made the language in the agreement the way they did. He knew the players back then. He knew the water systems. And such is true to today. He knows the players today and the water systems and the water challenges of today. So his experience in helping provide direction in getting the negotiations going in the right path and then allowing the negotiations to develop themselves, that was very critical. There's really no means of measurement for that type of expertise. There was a number of discussions that had taken place where Mr. Takaichi's statements were very valuable to us, such as the ability to share the groundwater credits or the allocation. If one agency was unable to use some of their allocation, if another neighboring agency that had a need for them were able to negotiate taking that water and thus not penalizing our agency for not taking enough water and potentially losing that right to that water in the future. So there's some forward thinking there that was very valuable for this agency. And you really you can't measure that on any type of report other than the final document. The final document we're working on, I spoke with the city of Oxnard, who has been in communications with United Water Conservation District in the last 2 weeks, and we are hopeful to have that agreement written and in place by the end of the year. There's a couple of factors that will be dependent on that. One of them is all these stakeholders will have to have an opportunity to read the document in its entirety. But there's a number of good beneficial things that are now stated in that agreement that came out of directly from Lynn Takaichi's input. So, yes, ma'am.
Well, I guess, when I brought this up, maybe I wasn't specific enough. I'm just interested, when you had Mr. Takaichi and you wanted to contact him, what was his main purpose what task were you looking for? And then, have we gotten those tasks completed? And how will it benefit us? Because I read through all the things that you gave, and obviously he was busy, but what was he doing? It's my negligence. I'm new to the board, but I can't see giving a consultancy a contract to someone without a specific task that you want to have accomplished. So maybe I'm looking at it from an administrative level that I dealt with and not what you're dealing with.
He was tasked with the negotiating of the agreement.
The original agreement or the one now?
Negotiating this new agreement, the language. And it was his knowledge that really shined the light on a number of issues within the original document that, the PHWA feels that, staff feels that knowledge was very valuable to getting the new language written. Getting the new language written into the agreement. And so he was tasked with the negotiations with the other agencies based on his knowledge, and he did complete that. There was other tasks that were, if time permitted and budget allowed, there was other factors that was going to be incorporated, such as long-term water strategy. However, that never developed because we didn't get past the negotiations of the new language of the agreement. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, the duration of negotiations took way too long for a number of different reasons, and that subsequently consumed his time and the budget. And so there was a number of negotiations that were continuing today that does not have Lynn Takaichi's involvement in. After his funding ran out, then he no longer attended the meetings and participated. However, it was his foundation and his support in the beginning stages of these negotiations that are really benefiting the agency.
And how, at the end of the year when we get the report, will there be specific tasks that were accomplished and how it helps us?
Well, the task was the negotiating itself. He could have sat quietly and not participated, but he didn't. He participated. He explained to us the areas that really needed to be looked at. He made comments and references to, that's good, but we could do better in this area, or, that's not good for us, so don't continue into that area of discussion. So, his direction was valuable during the negotiations.
Okay.
Other questions, comments? My only suggestion is that maybe in the future with these kinds of contracts, because I know with professional services agreements, Mr. Takaichi is acting as an extension of staff. And it's hard to pinpoint a milestone or a specific product that needs to be accomplished by his extension of staff. But I think that would be helpful to better understand when these meetings occur for which he's billing this agency, that what's the purpose, what's the expected outcome, and ultimately to measure up what his participation has been and what we've achieved as a result of his involvement. So I appreciate the concern you have about trying to connect the dots, so to speak, with professional services agreements. Question I would raise is that his effective hourly rate is about $260. Your billing rate is closer to $75 an hour, if I understand our own billing rates. And so my question would be, well, to what extent could you backfill some of his involvement in attending these meetings, but to use him as a kind of a barometer of whether these negotiations in fact are to our advantage or proceeding in a productive way, so that he's not actually billing the agency for the time and expense of attending these various meetings or listening on conference calls, but that be the work of staff, and then to use him as that intellectual whatever sounding board to make certain that we're getting what we our interests are protected in this process. Is that a feasible way of going about this and reducing the expenses to this agency?
Yes, sir. And we did do that, maybe not as extensively in the beginning, but towards the middle or the later half, we started having him only come in as needed. I was attending those meetings. I was doing the conference calls. So he was there on a supporting aspect. So yes, sir, that can be incorporated in greater detail.
And so what's the status right now? He's exhausted the allocation that this body authorized, correct, for his involvement?
Correct. I think there's still a couple $100 left on the books.
So looking forward, what do you see his role being, or the necessity for his continued involvement?
In these negotiations that are ongoing now, there probably won't need his involvement. If we go into different directions or a different project, then we determine it at that point. But
Okay.
right now, there's no
Urgency,
scheduled work.
no need. Okay, so we can address that at a future time when it becomes necessary. So again, any further follow-up or questions? Okay, so that would then bring us to item C, the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency.
Yes, sir. The Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency in the month of August was dark. That was a scheduled event, that was on the schedule to be dark in that month. So in this report, I just provided some information off the Fox Canyon website, just as information for you folks. It provides links to critical information, more additional information than what I have available to me as staff. There's information on here from the Technical Advisory Group, which allows maybe you or the board as a whole to see how the GSP project is moving along, what are the topics of discussion. The Technical Advisory Group, however, will get really technical. So if you don't understand the charts or the language, it might be difficult to follow. But it at least gives you an idea to at least evaluate it and look and see what types of discussions are going on, the frequency, the magnitude, the number of people, the amount of effort, a whole list of other things, just to hopefully give you that extra piece of advice to see if there's something that you might be interested in hearing more about or directing myself to provide to you. So this is basically just an update off their website. I also printed today, which wasn't in the packet, but I printed today. There's actually a public workshop scheduled for the 20th, which is this Wednesday. I believe it's at 6:30 at the County Government Center. It's a public workshop on the development of the SMP, or I'm sorry, the GSP. So there will be a number of people in attendance, probably a few hundred. It might be an opportunity to either monitor online. I don't know if they provide streaming, live streaming or not, but I think they do. Or you may be able to attend the meeting and participate in the discussion yourselves. So again, it's just information that's available. And with that-
Questions to staff? Do we have any more insight as to what the likely reduction of groundwater extraction could be? We've been talking in the range of 20 to 25%, and I know that was not validated at this point, but it was kind of what the experts were expecting would occur. Do we have a better fix on what that reduction might be?
No, sir. Other than there has been group negotiations going on and discussions with the ag community and with the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency staff. And there is some discussions. There is, I can't really say it's a proposal yet, but there are some numbers that are being discussed. They're not available for public yet because they're still having those discussions. But there is action, there is movement occurring. I would anticipate this board would probably hear something on this very subject within the next 1 or 2 months.
Okay. All right, then, unless I hear any other questions from our members, that brings us to item D, the Brackish Water Reclamation Project, and this is an operational report. Again, I assume that this is for information purposes?
Yes, sir. Again, because the facility is still in the bypass, the membrane bypass. The membranes are currently not in use. We're still in a blending ratio configuration at this time. However, our percentage of ratio is going up a little bit. It's a 80-20 split, 80% groundwater, 20% surface water, largely due because of the increased temperatures for the last month. There's been higher water use. So because Cayugas water is used to meet our peaking demand capabilities, that's why the Cayugas supply is going up. Also, the SDIs still remain high with the 3.85 due to the high iron and manganese levels, which is a result from United Water Conservation District needing to run the deep aquifer wells in order to meet demand. Looking at the future of the shortage water supply, PHWA staff does not see a shortage in the ability to meet demands at this time. When the GSP comes into play and gets closer into development, that will be reevaluated and then determine if there is an issue there. So we'll definitely be having that discussion as soon as the numbers are starting to get plugged into the model for the groundwater sustainability plan. And so with that, if there's any questions, I can be happy to answer them.
Questions? I can't help myself. I have to ask questions. When we're in an offline condition with the RO facility, what's our TDS that's being delivered to customers?
Well, that can vary based on the ratio of supply from Cayugas and United. And it can vary from day to day. So I don't have an average. I can guess it's probably going to be somewhere around 1,000.
Do we have a policy on how we determine that allocation in order to achieve a certain TDS level?
No, sir, there is no. We attempted to do that a few years ago with that chart, that the ratio chart that you're familiar with. That was the first time looking at trying to develop, is there a policy that needs to be written? What would it look like in terms of the cost? And so, but there was no definitive policy that came out of that discussion.
Is that a relevant discussion point for this body? Because it would ultimately affect the cost to the end user if we shot for a lower TDS blending scenario. And of course, then I'm going to ask the question, what's the upper end of that range that would still be potable water that meets all health and safety standards?
Well, the water that's being delivered now does meet all public health and safety standards.
So what
It
is the
does.
upper end of that TDS spectrum?
It's a lot higher than that, so I don't have that exact number. I can research that and look into it, though.
Well, I have to defer to my colleagues here, but if we're going to be continuing down a path where the RO system is offline, is there a way that the customer at the end of the line can receive some sort of compensation for the fact that the system isn't in operation? And that would, part of the factor in that is that what's the highest level of TDS continues to meet health and safety standards, and then what does that translate to in terms of how much water comes from Cayugas versus groundwater from United, the costing of the sources that we receive?
Well, I can tell you that the TDS levels that we have today, they do meet public health standards, and the only way to lower that would be to, in today's economy, is to add more Cayugas water and use less United water.
That's to lower the TDS.
To improve
Correct.
the quality of the water, yes, sir. That in turn would do two things, though. When the less groundwater we use, then that will show the GMA that we can get by with less groundwater. And when the GSP comes into operation and they see that we've been able to get by with using less groundwater, then chances are less groundwater is what we'll get, which will then force us to forever, as long as the GSP is in place with restrictions, to continue to buy more Cayugas water, which is 3 times the cost of groundwater. So it's kind of between a rock and a hard place. I understand what you're asking for, but I also understand in order to achieve that, it can be punitive.
Well taken. I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, in more ways than just one, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Could I ask, one possible solution is removing the iron and manganese.
Yes, that was a plan that's been already targeted. That's one of the projects that was put on hold because of the negotiations of the OH pipeline agreement. The United Water Conservation District was not able or would not consider going out and securing bonds for capital projects when there's 2 major water agencies with an opt-out provision lingering over their agreement. So that iron and manganese treatment at the source was put on hold until the OH pipeline agreement can be signed and agreed upon.
You know, and if I may, thank you. So with regards to that, we also looked at perhaps doing something here at our facility, correct? We found that.
Well, we did, but it would rest, I think if I remember correctly, it was $3 or $3.5 million to bring something to our facility that then would, the ratepayers for our agency would then cover that cost. Where if the treatment for iron and manganese was moved up to United's source area, then all the people that benefit from that treatment would then share in the cost, which would make it a more cost-effective way of treating the water.
Or wasn't there another alternative also that we checked into, which was, could we put a chemical in there to help dissolve, and that proved not to be
Correct. We
ultimately.
looked at, United is still injecting a chemical to keep it sequestered, which means keep it liquid. But as soon as the chemical comes in, as soon as the water comes into our facility and we dose it with additional chemical, it oxidizes the iron and manganese, and then it plugs up the membrane. So it's just science.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Mr. Hickox, let's go back and review here. How do we determine the current ratio of United to Cayugas water that we're blending?
Right now, it's based solely off of system demand. It's an automated process because the demands can vary from night to day. You never know when there will be a fire hydrant used or sheared off. You don't know the temperatures on a given day, the time of year, the rainy season. There's a number of factors. And so what we do is we set the system up so that it automatically adjusts to the conditions. So when the conditions occur, then the system responds. And so that's what controls, in today's environment, a 80-20 or a 90-10 ratio. If we wanted to select a certain type of quality of water or a target, we could put some of that system in place and allow, we'll scale back the flow from United and allow Cayugas to then adjust accordingly.
Well, I'm thinking more of the contractual requirements that we have. We've got take or pay with Cayugas. And as you mentioned, if GMA is looking at our use of groundwater, it may be in our interest to use more United water at this point to show that we do have a need for the local water.
Correct.
So, from the perspective of policy on the board, I mean, those are the kinds of questions I'm asking. And so if we're at 80-20 now, if we went to 83-17 or whatever, is there a benefit curve here, I guess, is the question.
We are currently maximizing the use of the groundwater that's available. So any additional change to that, it depends on how you want to look at benefit. Is it benefit in cost or benefit in quality? So in order to get better quality, it comes at additional cost, whether we treat it or whether we buy more expensive water.
So, so what you're saying is, if I understand you, is that we're kind of at a sweet spot with the current configuration.
A little bit of everything is going on. We got the maximum take of groundwater, which will protect us in the long term. We're keeping our costs down by not buying as much expensive state water, and although the downside of that is the water quality does suffer. It still meets public health standards, but it is on the lower scale.
Okay, thanks. That's it.
Any comments?
I guess my only comment is we have the plant that's not being used, which has its costs, and we also have pipes that are within the system that are deteriorating faster because of the lower quality water, so that's another consideration.
The plant is still in service. The only thing that's not in service at the brackish water plant is the membranes are not in use. The chemical systems are still online. The water quality monitoring is still occurring. The maintenance is still occurring. The booster pumps are still providing the pressure to the distribution system, which gets all the water out to the member agencies. The pipeline is still being monitored. The SCADA control system is still online. So the facility itself is still operating. The only thing that's not operating are the membranes. And the membranes are basically what do the work for us as far as polishing the water. So unfortunately, that is not what's running right now.
Right. Well, thank you for clarifying.
Right. And
It is the fact, the reason we went into the system to begin with was quality combined with quantity that would be available. So it's unfortunate, but
correct.
until we come up with a miracle, I guess, we're kind of stuck with this. And 80-20, I think, was always pretty much the formula. wasn't it?
It's been a historical value, yes, and we're still continuing with that. And the difference is that we're bringing more of that 80% into the system.
Right.
So, even though, 20 years ago, we had less people, the demand has gone up, but our ratios are still the same. So it's based on our history. So we're trying to keep in line with our historical use so that we preserve our right in the future.
Okay, now's the time for someone to come up with a very, come up with a plan that would produce better water at a lower cost. Not what we've seen to date is that it costs more to bring in that quality, and that's been a problem, whether it's through desalination, reuse, or whatever. But hopefully there'll be something maybe coming up. If anybody knows about it, they should let us know, right?
And if I may, because we're on this subject, I would like to report to you that last week we had a failure of one of the pipelines inside the facility. And it flooded the facility again, but not as bad. And staff was there readily to deal with that issue. So it didn't impact the ability to supply water. It didn't impact the water quality of the customers. It required no notification to the state or to the public because no services were interrupted. We did notify each of the member agencies that the incident occurred and that we would have lower residuals in the system, but it was still high enough to be considered not in violation. So, but they did suffer a little bit of lower chlorine residual for 3 or 4 hours on Saturday, I think it was. So, but that system has already been, by 1 p.m. that afternoon, the system was already isolated and back online and operating completely. So now we have a repair to make. So, but it didn't appear to be any facility damage, any major damage or structure damage or anything. It's just got a little wet inside, so.
I have a question for you. My understanding with a single RO system, there's still wastewater that's created in the process. What's the percentage of loss of water through the filtration process?
That's called the efficiency. And so the efficiency is for our systems right around 19%.
So we're losing 19% of the water we receive. So when we're offline, does that mean that we're capturing that 19%?
Correct.
So shouldn't our water costs go down if in fact the water we're getting is being fully utilized rather than being treated and a portion of it, 20% of it, is being lost?
Well, the amount of water that we purchase per year is the amount of water we purchase per year. And so I see what you're saying, that, yeah, you would think that if we're capturing more and putting it into the distribution system, that the cost would go down. But the cost for 3,000 acre feet of water is still the cost for 3,000 acre feet of water. And like I was saying earlier, that our demands have gone up slightly over the years compared to 20 years ago. Although with conservation, they've gone down, so it's kind of a balancing act. There is a way to get some cost savings, but it's in the rate structure that has to be adjusted, and that's what City Council will be looking at later this evening on the cost of service and rate analysis.
Well, this has always been a difficult task for me to separate my PHWA hat from my City Council hat, because these are similar questions I'd expect our member agencies to be asking. Is it, how do we get the benefit from this? And but before I get into that, are there any other questions? Okay, because now we get to board member comments, and that's where I was going to suggest to our board members, following your lead, that is the Channel Islands Community Services District, On tonight's agenda for the city council is to take a look at a strategic planning process that really kind of, it rides your coattails on work that you've already done. Thank you very much. You were able to pass on some cost savings to us. At the same time, we're going to be looking at some of the initial conclusions of a rate study. It may be of value or of interest to you. Ultimately, what we're, I think, heading toward is some sort of common ground that our member agencies can agree upon in the long term. Because we all have these supply questions in mind and costs continue to go up, and to see if we can collaborate on an outcome that benefits all of us. So I just wanted to let you know on tonight's agenda, we'll have those sort of discussions with the city council, and certainly we'll report back to at our next PHWA meeting the outcome of those discussions. But just wanted to alert you to that. Anyway, that was a good segue into that, but I didn't mean to take away from any other member comments. So do we have any other? Please.
Yeah, so along with that, the city is also engaged with a grant writer / research organization. And so when that came up on the agenda for us at the city council meeting, I thought it might be a good idea maybe to entertain if there were any grants that this organization, that the PHWA could go for when we go towards either building or taking a look at some of these additional kinds of projects. So that came up. I just want to make sure that everybody here understands that, it is where the city's working with it, but it could be something that we consider as well. I forget what is their name, Rod?
California Consulting. They're one of the largest grant writing firms in California, focusing on public sector organizations, mostly cities, counties, and school districts.
Yeah, thank you.
Other comments, questions?
I'm wondering if our general manager, our Akbar Alakan, would like to make some comments regarding anything that's been said, but specifically the last couple of comments.
Please fill out a speaker card. Keep your comments to 3. Go ahead. Please.
Just referring to 2 items in particular. First one is the strategic planning exercise at KEH. I think we'll be discussing this evening, right? Item 8.
I will be discussing that.
8B, okay. Again, as we talked about at our last meeting, this is exactly the route that we hoped the city would go, and we're pleased to see that on the agenda. So thank you for following through on that, and I think it's going to be a fruitful exercise. After that, we just talked about grant writing, whatever projects might, that might be able to help further those discussions. So the result of your strategic planning exercise, from there we can now identify certain projects that may come to fruition that we can chase grant funds for. So there's a connection there. The second item regarding your rate study, this is a City of Port Hueneme item, just like it's on the City of Port Hueneme agenda. And so while we're interested in seeing how it turns out, much like the strategic planning exercise, we did that about a year or 2 ago, and we had our own study, and now it's actually my former employer. I'm hopeful that they'll do a great job for you guys, and I speak after the fact now. I hope our district is happy with that result. So I'm sure the city so far. And so I'm hopeful that'll also be the case for you guys too.
Thank you.
Great.
Chair Fick.
Too fast. So I was hoping you would give a executive summary, 2-3 sentence. What I saw in roughly 5 project proposals was local production. Or you might say it a different way, but what would you call it? The emphasis.
Yeah, you're speaking of the strategic planning?
Yes.
Okay. I think local production, they all fall into that category. And that was kind of the task that we had given to KEH is, aside from imported water, which we already kind of know it exists and we have a mechanism for receiving it and we know that it's costly, what other sources of water are out there? So of course they're all going to fall under the umbrella of being local sources. Now where they differ is this something that CIB, CSD can pursue on their own? Is this something that they would do in concert with PHWA? Is this something that PHWA may approach the city of Oxnard or even a larger entity about going into a more regional project? So each one of those 5 projects is slightly nuanced in the sense that it involves more or less players, is something that can be done now versus something where maybe legislation has not caught up to the technology. And so there's different sizes and costs associated with each one of those 5 alternatives. I would imagine that after the city goes through the similar exercise, I'm hoping some of those 5 alternatives make it on there so that way we can kind of maybe merge those efforts in the future.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I was going to bring this up at the city council meeting, but as we all know, our wastewater system is tied in with Oxnard, and we all know the condition of the Oxnard system. And I'm convinced, have been for a long time, we need to start thinking in terms of reclamation rather than water treatment. And I've had some conversations with our colleagues on the Oxnard City Council. Obviously, we've got a number of issues going on there. And my suggestion was that we have a joint city council meeting with the Oxnard City Council and the Port Hueneme City Council. And the Beach District is involved from the water agency side of things as well. We've got, I see 3 areas that would be good for the agenda. One is the some of the agreements, some of the financials. We just heard that staff is working on that. There may be a good report on that. The other aspect is to look at the assets we already have. We've got 3 plants right across the street from each other. There's another potable plant in Oxnard that's part of the system. We've got stuff in the ground already. How do we maximize the use of what we have? And then going forward, clearly, with the condition of the wastewater plant, with the considerations of sea level rise, something's got to be done there. That's got to be changed. It's a crisis condition, but it also provides us an opportunity to look to the future. And if we do this right, we can provide for the needs of 250,000 people for the next 3 or 4 decades. And it's an opportunity I think we need to seize, and I think the best way to do that is we have all these agencies working together, whether it, I don't know what legal structure it would take or what would be the best form. That's another question. But I really think if we don't take this opportunity, then shame on us. So I'll mention this again at the city council meeting. But this is the time to think pretty big. And it's the time to think about reclamation, because that's the only place we're going to get new water.
Yeah, I don't want to speak too soon for Steve. To Oxnard's credit, they have started the discussion with a reclaimed or recycled water program. In fact, there was a meeting that I think just got postponed next week, which really included staff from the entire Western Ventura County region to discuss what they termed their recycled water business plan. And I think it speaks kind of along the same lines that you were speaking to, Director Sharkey, about a regional approach, getting everyone at the table. I do think this probably needs to get to the director/city council member level at some point. I think where staff needs to kind of figure out first is what ideas are we going to bring to the table that city councils and boards such as yourselves can decide upon. I think we're still maybe, Steve, maybe you can jump in here, but I think we're still a little ways off from presenting those options.
Premature yet.
Yeah.
The discussions are happening, but there's not enough information for the rest of us. Oxnard may have a grand picture already, but some of us don't know the whole picture or the direction that they want to go in now. I know it still involves the GREAT program, but maybe different components or some components of the GREAT program are being modified or altered slightly and taken on a different avenue. So until they share that information with us and see what the grand picture is, then it's a little premature to be bringing.
It's always the chicken and egg situation because we're getting into a political arena here. And maybe the way to do this, and I'd certainly be willing to do it as the chair of this body, and for that matter, the mayor of the city, to initiate a dialogue, whether it's a letter or a meeting, what have you, with our counterpart at the city of Oxnard, and the chair of the Channel Island Services District, to kind of task staff of those bodies, the executive staff, that is yourself and our city manager and the city manager of Oxnard, to kind of pencil out an agenda to help guide that kind of discussion when the political bodies come together, because you don't want the political bodies to be thrown into a room and, you know, give them some tri-tip and say, come out, you know, with a full belly. I think we have to provide some guidance to those respective agencies if we're going to convene them. And I agree with you, this is the time to do that, but the process, it seems to me, is for, at the political level, to ask the respective political leaders of each one of those entities to agree upon having their staffs get together and craft an agenda that can that each of the agencies can feel comfortable with, and then proceed with a joint meeting. Is that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's probably the correct way to do it. Some of the discussion and why it kind of wound up where it did was because some of our counterparts in our neighboring city were not at all satisfied with the progress their staff was making. But you know, the general manager here tells me that you know, things are looking better, and that's, you know, when we have, you know, my thought is when we have a good position on that, we should be ready to go forward and start, you know, looking at the political muscle or whatever it would take to move forward in a bigger way. But I think if we can solve some of these problems that staff has been working on for oh so long, then I think that's where we definitely where we have to start. It's just that, I mean, there's been frustration from a number of people at how rapidly the pace has been moving. So the attempt here is to actually get off the dime and start going forward.
If I can make just two quick comments about the timing.
Oh, you're beyond your 3 minutes.
I'll leave after this, I swear. The first one is there, as we all kind of know here, there's been kind of a change in the guard there with respect to their public works director, and they're kind of in the search of finding that person, whether it's someone on staff or someone outside. The former public works director obviously was kind of the champion behind that the great program, as Steve referred to, and so I can imagine that that's going to have an impact on some of their timeline. And the meeting that both Steve and I were referring to that was going to take place next week, that I think got postponed for similar reasons. The other thing is, we talked about probably a few different issues going on, even during today's meeting, with the OH pipeline, with the Fox Canyon GMA, this item being recycled water, reclaimed water being the third one. All of those involve the same agencies and the same personnel at those agencies. And so I think it's helpful for staff to remind our elected officials that there are different issues that we're trying to tackle simultaneously. And so much like a news cycle, our attention is focused over here, and we understand we got to push this issue forward too. But in some cases, some of these folks are having to juggle multiple balls in the air. So I just wanted to get that message across in case you feel things aren't moving in a
well, that's my thinking, is it's staff, you're the experts, you're the technical, you know, part of this formula. And it's really the directive that has to come from the political bodies to say, let's get it done, but then to allow you to vet out an agenda that does exactly what you're saying, is that we've got, you know, multiple equations here we're trying to solve, and why not make certain, if we're going to go through this exercise, that we cover all the bases. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's my general thinking. Unless I hear otherwise, perhaps we'll leave it to our executive director here to help orchestrate that effort.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, although I will say that just based on some of the conversations that I had with Board Member Sharkey last week, I did put some feelers out to the city manager's office in Oxnard, just saying that there's a real desire to start getting more visible forward motion on all these issues, and that part of that should be a joint meeting of the elected officials at some point when we've got enough information and material to have a meaningful discussion. But in the meantime, we've seen probably over the last 8 weeks more progress in terms of being able to get FaceTime with high-level Oxnard staff than we have during my 9 months that I've been here. So something's happening there. They are in a major transition with their Public Works Department. Not only the Public Works Director, but 2 Assistant Director positions are now being recruited for. They're doing a complete, reorg of their Public Works operations. So still a lot of transition going on there, but we've got what appears to be a responsive ear now in Ruth Osuna, who is one of the 2 assistant city managers. And Mr. Nyhoff, Greg Nyhoff, did participate in most of one of our meetings recently and seems a lot more engaged on this. So, there's hopefully some forward momentum going, and we'll make sure that we don't forget to have the elected officials involved in that discussion when we get to the point where we've got, again, something meaningful for you to have to chew on and discuss.
Thank you.
And bear in mind, the last time I remember having a joint session with the city council in Oxnard was when I was not on the council, but I was a staff member, and it was a interesting session, but nothing really meaningful came from it. So as you develop an agenda, I would hope that we could also say, these are the intended outcomes, so that we actually have targets of what we want to accomplish by virtue of having us come together, and not simply, smile at each other and talk nice things. Anyway, enough said. I think that we got the general gist of what we need. Okay, any other board comments? Okay, I do have a speaker card. Thank you for waiting, Eileen. Please come forward.
My name is Eileen Tracy, and I live in Hueneme Bay. And I haven't been around because I fell in the beginning of March, and I was in nursing homes and hospitals, and all my muscles atrophied, and I've been so worried I wouldn't be able to get up out of your chair. So I was trying to always watch it online, but most of the time, this agency, no one uses their mics. And when I'm online, from the long distance, if I'm lucky, I can see whose mouth is moving. But I really hope that somebody takes responsibility to have you all turn your mics on. But anyways, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about long-range planning because some of you may know I have one foot in the Oxnard chamber and the other foot down here in your chamber. And so I hear a lot of things in Oxnard that never come up in Hueneme. And one or two of them is they only are trying to give you a 5-year lease on the land where the water treatment plant resides because they're expecting an expansion of wastewater. And so that's why they're giving you a short lease. But nobody down here knows about that. And the other thing is that usually they used to lease the land to Hueneme for $1 a year, and they proposed raising it to $1,400 a year. And that's apparently in negotiation, so nobody down here is talking about it. But my idea, and the reason they gave it, because they might kick us out in 5 years. So long-range planning takes on a new priority here. So that's my one ulcer that you're giving me. And the other is the brackish water, or whatever you want to call it, the iron and manganese. Now, I know it meets health standards, but does that include dishwashers, washing machines, and hot water tanks? Because, we could wind up with a bunch of lawsuits from residents who are refurbishing all their appliances in their household. So I don't feel like we have a long time to keep putting this off, putting it off. I'd really like to see, I used to worry about structured deficit, Mayor, but you came along and you had your strategic plan documents, so I don't worry about, I know it's still a problem, but I'm not worried about structured deficit. So now I'm on to long-term planning down here with the Water Agency. And so, I was worried if they kick us out, you want me to shut up?
No, please.
I really hope if you were to do long-term planning, you look at all the options, like the one that Mr. Nordall proposed about having the Navy take a water treatment plant for us. And the other one is one of the things Oxnard is doing, taking some of their great facility, reclaimed wastewater, and they're putting a pump in at their park at 2nd and J, I think it's H or J, and they're putting, the reclaimed water into the upper aquifer. And by doing that, that water becomes potable after 1 year. So they not only are replenishing part of their aquifer, but they're giving themselves more drinking water. And I was hoping that, we have a lot of parks down here, maybe we could grab some of their great water and stick it down through the pipes into one of the aquifers down here, because we want to avoid seawater intrusion. And I'm going to tell you something. I was looking at Fox Canyon, and they have the condition of the water from United as chronic, and they also are reporting the seawater intrusion. So, there's some serious problems here. And I mean, I'd like to see us take advantage of possibly water treatment on the base with all of his experts. I mean, I don't know what it costs, but having United build a water treatment plant costs money, right? Having us relocate our treatment plant to another location takes money, so we may be looking a gift horse in the mouth, and I don't think anybody's taking that seriously. And probably you may say, I don't know what I'm talking about. That's what I hear most of the time. But I just want to put a bug in your ear, and maybe, Mr. Butler, I sent you that email about, and Mr. Hickox called me today, and I did get a lot of answers, so thank you for responding. Anyways, that's all I'm going to say for now, so.
Thank you.
Council meeting.
I would hope that you'd come back at our council meeting. Great, okay. All right, that's the only speaker card I have. Oh, did you want to address
Before
that?
you move to adjourn, I'd like to just clarify one item. I heard you mention that we would report back to the board in a month on the strategic workshop. That workshop is 9 weeks in duration, or the whole project is 9 weeks in duration. Somewhere in that 4th week, I think it is where the workshop will actually take place. And then the analysis will then continue from that workshop, and then the final outcome or report will be somewhere, because of the holidays, probably somewhere around the 1st of the year before we actually come back to the board with information as a result of the workshop. So I just wanted to share that.
Okay. All right, unless I have anyone else who would like to address us, I will adjourn our meeting to our next regular meeting, which is, what is the date?
October 20th.
October. See, I got multiple dates here. So what are we adjourning to? October 16th. Okay, at 4 o'clock here in the same place. So with that, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Yeah. Progress is being made.